This week, we welcome Mike O'Malley, Senior Vice President of Strategy at Seneca Global, to discuss new AI algorithm regulations are coming. Will yours pass government scrutiny? In the leadership and communication section, cybersecurity starts with the board and C-suite, or at least it should. How CISOs can achieve more with less during uncertain economic times. Why authentic leadership is so hard, and more. Business Security Weekly starts now.
This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we explore the business of security to improve the security of business. Your trusted source for actionable insights on leadership, communication, and innovation. Get ready for Business Security Weekly.
According to the 2022 Data Breach Investigations Report, the human remains the #1 driver of breaches today, demonstrating that cybersecurity is no longer just a technical challenge, but a human one as well. But how do you manage the human risks of cybersecurity? It starts with measurement. Only by effectively quantifying human risk can organizations engage employees with relevant activities to truly change human behavior. That's human risk management. Map key human behaviors to the business risks that matter most to your organization for free by visiting securityweekly.com/living security. Welcome to Business Security Weekly. This is episode number 308, recorded June 5th, 2023. I am your host, Matt Alderman. It's official. I am no longer a parent of a teenager. Baby boy is 20. Happy birthday, Brendan. Joining remotely for this segment, for today's segments, are my co-hosts, Mr. Jason Albuquerque in studio.
In studio, yeah. I'm liking coming into studio, man. So this is good, especially now that all New England sports has kind of gone down the toilet for me. The Red Sox are losing hardcore, so I'm not even paying attention there. My Celtics lost in the semifinals, and football is, we gotta wait. Gotta wait for football season. So. And my Bruins too. My Bruins didn't make it.
Oh yeah. That was a crazy overtime loss that changed that whole series. Anyways, yeah, we won't go there because I have a lot of friends in Boston that feel the same way you do, Jason. Also joining today, Mr. Ben Carr. How you doing, Ben?
I am doing well. It's been really nice down here in the Austin area. We get some a little bit of rain, more rain than we've had in a while. But yeah, it's been great. So just getting ready for summer to kick off. Kids are out of school. Things are going well. Moving forward on the house. So, yeah, great times.
Yeah, we were commenting last night. We got the rain come through last night. I was like, it wasn't like this in June last year. We were already in the hundreds. No. Like this, it's been a beautiful spring and early part of the summer. So,
yeah, just great weather.
Great weather. Our teams from Security Weekly and SC Media were on site at RSA Conference 2023, delivering in-depth reporting, analysis, and interviews from the conference. If you were unable to join us in person or didn't manage to catch our video live stream from Broadcast Alley, you can access all of our RSA 2023 content at securityweekly.com/RSAC. Mike O'Malley is the SVP of Strategy at Seneca Global, a leading provider of innovation outsourcing to solve complex technology challenges. He's been in product development for 20 plus years, leading development, product management, marketing, and M&A in the tech space. Throughout his career, Mike has combined deep engineering knowledge with business acumen to help companies figure out what creates success in the market for a product or solution. Then he builds and coaches teams to make it happen again and again. Mike, welcome to Business Security Weekly.
Thank you, Matt, for having me. I do appreciate it. And I'm based in Chicago, so we are perpetually in sports morning.
So, Mike, just so you know, I'm originally from Cleveland, so I've been in sports morning since about the time I was born.
Okay, it's not that bad, but Chicago's getting close, so we need something soon.
There is always hope, okay? The Patriots of the 80s, when I was a kid, sucked. So there's always hope, and look what happened. The dynasty happened.
That is true. We are hoping. We are actually rooting for Jimmy Butler. If our teams can't win, at least maybe some of our former players can.
There you go. All right. So, Mike, we're going to get into the American Data Privacy and Protection Act. What I think is interesting about this legislation, it's been around for a little while, right? We've talked about privacy regulations at the federal level on this show multiple times, right? I don't think it's efficient to have multiple state regulations out there. I've always wanted the feds to do something. They've been dragging their feet for decades. So here we have this legislation, it's been around for a little bit, but it's starting to pick up a little steam. And I think some of that steam has to do with some of the new things around artificial intelligence and chat GPT. Let's talk about what does this legislation look like and why is it starting to get some momentum?
Sure. So from a standpoint of why is it gaining momentum right now, I think there's an evolution in thinking, right? If you look at back when GDPR and some of those and the California regulation and some of those things happened, it was really around data privacy. And specifically, they were worried about the problem of, are you keeping my personal records safe, right? And now, through the years, people have realized that there are additional questions, and especially now with more and more powerful AI algorithms, now the conversation has evolved to the next level, and now it's around, okay, now that you have this data and you're protecting it, now what are you doing with it? And so now it's getting into a discussion around the algorithm itself. Is the algorithm safe? Is the algorithm effective? Is the algorithm non-biased? And how am I using this algorithm? How am I training it? And then how am I using it in the marketplace?
Yeah, so it's kind of the what aspects of what are you doing with the data now that you've collected it? Then what does that mean for data, things like data provenance, right? I mean, we've talked a little bit about data provenance, probably not enough in some of the impacts of what happens when the data gets manipulated and what does it do on the other side, which I don't know that this legislation will address or not, but there are a lot of open questions about, now that I have the data, what are you doing with it, and how is this going to impact products and services and other outcomes that people haven't thought about before?
Correct. I think the most important thing for your audience to understand from a CISO or a C-level executive standpoint, right, is that you're going to need to understand within your business what AI algorithms are being used, and you're going to need to prepare some type of justification. Meaning, if you look at the legislation today it says that these algorithms are going to be audited and that you're going to have to prepare a report from an outside third party and give that to the Federal Trade Commission, who's going to look at that report and then basically verify that what you're doing is okay. And so I think the first and most important thing for CISOs to understand is today, if I look at that environment today, right, I'm just scrambling, I'm using best-in-class products. I'm trying to, fight fire with fire, in that there are bad guys using bots, leveraging AI, doing things like that to try to hack into my network and steal sensitive data, right? But now going forward, I need to defend myself. I'm largely going to do that with AI algorithms because those algorithms are more efficient than humans. They don't make human errors, right? There's lots of great reasons why security wants to leverage AI, which we all know about. But now you're going to need to justify, what is that AI doing, the data that it's working with, right? And exactly how and what am I leveraging within my business that I didn't need to do before? That's the big so what.
So now, Mike, in our pre-show banter, you had talked about this has already gone through subcommittee. It's on the docket to hit the House floor. So a version of this, there is a potential of a version of this passing. In the oversight, arm enforced by Federal Trade Commission, who's considered a covered entity? Who would fall under this bill from a business perspective? Are there certain size businesses? Are there classifications? Who would be a covered entity?
That's a great question. So the answer is there are certain size businesses, but it's interesting in that the business size is not only determined by revenue, but it's also determined by number of records. So for example, at Seneca Global, we work with a lot of security startups. So a lot of security startups are concerned about this and are putting processes in place for this today, because even though they may not have the revenue base, they are going to have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of records. And so it's not only about amount of revenue, but it's also about amount of records that you're holding. And those are the two thresholds that in some form are going to be used to determine whether you're going to fall under this law or not.
Okay. Now to that point, are there exemptions? Is there any exemption rule in there as far as businesses are concerned? Or at the end of the day, I always have the concern of, would federal, state, and local government fall under this? Does this cover? I mean, it's FTC. That's the enforcement arm. So that lends me to believe that government will not be enforced by this bill.
Yeah, the way the legislation is written today, it's written talking about businesses and the AI and algorithm and software that they're using to protect their business and that they're offering to consumers. So there really isn't any wording in there today talking about municipal government or things like that. It's really focused on businesses themselves. But as we said, this is going to the House floor. So I think the thing to notice is the fact that it's going to change in some form. All bills do, right? It hasn't even made it to the Senate yet. But the important thing to note is there's growing momentum about this. There are lots of hearings going on. There's lots of discussion happening in Silicon Valley and other high-tech communities because there's a belief that in some form or another, this is going to pass and that companies are going to be required to provide some type of justification for the algorithms and the AI that they're using.
Yeah, interesting. Now, I'd like to talk through, because Jason, you use pieces today. I'm curious, like, what do you see as the potential impact to what you're already doing with AI in your existing environment? Like, do you see a potential impact here?
I mean, again, the devil's in the details with the bill, right? Because I'm using a third-party AI. So just, transparency, Mike, IT services organization, right? So IT consulting, IT managed services, we play heavy in the Microsoft space. So a lot of the tools we use are driven by Microsoft's AI, right? The chatbots and things of that nature. And the question becomes, does there become some liability on our side for using these tools to, because we're not processing data, we're not transferring data, but we would have client information.
Where's the boundary layer, right, Jason?
Where is that line?
Where do you draw
sand?
that line? Yeah.
Yeah, I think what we're going to see is, I think you're going to see a breakdown between software organizations and service organizations, right? And what I think you're going to see is that this is going to certainly apply to all software organizations. They're going to have to comply with this. And then out of this, there's going to be some type of stamp of approval coming from the FTC or someone to say that this algorithm is safe, this algorithm is non-biased, et cetera. And then that's going to be some type of certification that you're going to have to show in order to commercially sell that, right? And then as part of this, if you're a services organization, you're going to need to check and confirm that all of the tools that you're using have passed this, have those certifications, and those certifications are current because on an annual basis, right, those certifications are going to need to be updated. So I think it's going to move into that type of a scenario where you've got services organizations that are going to require the certifications to pass on to their customers, but also software organizations that are going to need to get the certifications in the first place and get approval.
Yeah. So for the software companies and the manufacturers, they're the ones that are going to have to go through the audit. For us, for a services organization, it's part of our third-party vendor risk management program. We're going to have to embed this there to make sure that they have those certifications. So that way our customers feel comfortable doing business with us. Is that
exactly? Exactly. And I think then the other fly in the ointment that they'll have to think about through the legislation, or we'll have to see how this gets implemented, is if I am a business that buys a piece of software, for example, that is just an AI algorithm itself. If I'm starting to use those building blocks to build and customize my own applications inside my business, now I've got to go through this process as well.
Got it.
Right. And so you can think of a scenario where let's take permissions, right? As an example, I'm looking at cloud permissions and I want to make sure that I'm not giving too many permissions to too many people inside my organization. And I want to see how they are used to make sure there aren't bad actors trying to get in. Well, if I am taking algorithms and buying those, and now I'm looking at databases that I own inside my company, of usage data and how my employees and my customers and things like that are using the product and how they normally behave. And my AI algorithm is munging on that data, trying to determine, are there good actors or bad actors, for example, trying to access my cloud. Well, now you could see a scenario where that company itself, even though they're not a software maker, so to speak, because they are customizing that for their own business, that there's going to be some amount of compliance they would have to have as well.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah, I could see the scenario where that's going to end up in an outsourced solution where you're going to essentially try to outsource that risk and outsource that compliance activity where you're sending the data out, somebody's going to process it and send it back to try to obfuscate that. I mean, the issue right now is just from a privacy side, trying to comply with all the different regulations is making it honestly difficult for CISOs and privacy people to try to handle this internally. It's a mishmash of different regulations, right?
Yeah,
correct. I think you make a great point, right? If I'm a CISO today and I'm looking at this legislation, part of what this is telling me is that I'm going to have to start relying on more additional third-party outside service organizations to help me with this and manage compliance, especially if I'm doing this level of customization. Otherwise, this is another task that's going to fall on me internally, right? And we all know that the role of a CISO today is a very tough role. People are generally not lasting very long in these types of roles. There's a lot of burnout in these roles. It's a really hard job. And there's no question that this is going to make it tougher and more complicated. And so you would think looking for third-party providers that have this expertise that can manage this for you is definitely going to be in demand.
How do you see the auditing process playing out? You know, one of the most recent regulations that I see and kind of saw play out is CMMC. Do you see it kind of following that same model where you have an accreditation body and then you have certified auditors and then those auditors will come in and audit your organization? Or do you see it more of a self-assessment, self-attestation type audit that these organizations are going to have to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is where, right, the legislation doesn't get particularly granular because obviously at the end of the day, primarily these are lawyers and advisors to lawyers in Congress writing the legislation. They're not technical people, right? And so there's a lot of question here about what is going to be that chain of command, right? They've specified that it needs to be an outside third party that conducts the audit because they don't want self-certification. So if I'm a software development organization or I'm a security product company, I can't audit it myself internally. I have to have some outside third party stamp it and say that it's safe and say that it's non-discriminatory and look at the training data and say it's okay. So there's definitely going to have to be some level, you would think, of accredited outside organizations of auditors who are looking at these algorithms and saying that those are okay. But this is where the devil gets into the details right after this likely passes in the implementation phase. And this type of ecosystem, I would think, is going to get set up.
Yeah, I mean, we saw this play out in Graham-Leach-Bliley, Sarbanes-Oxley, other HIPAA, right, where the requirements are set in the legislation, and then it takes us a while to figure out, like, what does that actually mean and how do you implement it? I mean, I could see NIST getting tasked with creating a set of criteria to evaluate these kind of AI algorithms against, similar to what they've done with the cybersecurity framework, the 853 and other requirements, because I would not want to leave it up to the FTC and the willy-nilly nature of a government body to figure this out. You would want some solid criteria behind what the evaluation and audit would look like. And so this, potentially something for NIST to take on like they have in other regulations.
Yeah. And
I think that's a great comment, right? I think you're definitely going to want some type of consistency of the audits across multiple different companies. So you're talking then about auditing standards. So NIST or somebody would have to set that up, right? And then I think you're also talking about, some outside group that gets certified as having enough knowledge in AI algorithms and how they run, right, to determine, because part of the question here is going to be how much data is being used. Am I right? By the nature of AI algorithms, right, the more I can always give the algorithm more data and hopefully it becomes slightly more accurate, right? But the question is going to turn into what's enough. and what's accurate enough for the amount of privacy or the amount of liability that I'm giving up, right? And so I think there's definitely going to need to be some type of ecosystem set up of groups of, technical auditors, right, that have that expertise to look at that, to say, yes, you are using best in class procedures to build your algorithms and train your algorithms, and that the ends justifies the means.
So, Mike, you hit a point there, which I want to dive into and understand a little better and get your thoughts on it. Is you mentioned that you could provide the algorithm with more data and get better output, and I think while that's generally true, isn't the concern somewhat, especially as we start to figure out how we regulate and how we look at whether the AI is producing the data we expect? Isn't that only part of the question, right? I mean, we could give it more data to get a better output based upon the data set, but if the underlying algorithm in and of itself is skewed, essentially trying to present the user with data that they want or what it thinks they want versus accurately analyzing the data in a non-biased way, or the underlying algorithm has some issue, right? That it's utilizing the data, and the underlying complexity of the algorithm gets to a point where it becomes really, really difficult to truly understand that, right? Like there's the two sides of the coin. Is the data set the right data set you're analyzing on? And then is the algorithm actually generating, based upon that data set, the answer you would expect it to versus what it eventually generates?
Yes, I think I think you look at that correctly, right? I think there's two questions here, as you said, and the one question is going to be around the algorithm itself. Are you using the right algorithm? As you guys know, right, there's many different AI algorithm models that you can use on a data set, right, depending on what it is you're trying to solve for, what insights you're trying to get. So there's a question that needs to be answered on, are you using the right algorithm for the type of analysis that you want to do? And as you said, then once assuming the answer to that question is yes, then there's going to be a second question. And the second question is going to be, what is the data you're feeding it? What's the training data you're feeding it? Is it safe? Is it non-biased, right? Is it a good data set to use? And what's enough?
That was going to be my question.
Trade-off of privacy and privacy and efficacy. Is it the right set of data? How much data is being used, and where's the balance there? So I think there's two sets of questions.
My next question to you, Mike, was what are the duties of the covered entity? Are there any limitations to what they can collect, process, transfer, right? In data types, whether they can sell data, whether they can transfer it. Is that covered in this bill? What is enough data, or can these organizations just collect whatever the hell they want and put it into their AI algorithms?
So the way the bill is written today is that the companies need to justify through these third-party auditors. This is why this ecosystem is going to need to be set up. That this audit is going to need to justify the data that's being used. So that's how compliance in their minds, I think today is going to go, is they need to justify whatever they're being used to say that's okay, and have a third-party auditor come in and basically agree with that.
So what's reasonably necessary to run the business
for that auditor?
So what's reasonably necessry to run their business? Is that
exactly? And so that's why you're going to have this trade-off, right, between what's the efficacy of the software application of the AI? Is it 90% effective, 85% effective, 95% effective? And with how much data does it use in order to give those recommendations? And where's the right trade-off there?
So now I want to flip it on its ear. What are my rights as a consumer? Does this bill cover consumer data rights like consent, objection, data ownership, control? Can I get my data revoked from these organizations?
So it does have some of that. Most of that obviously flows back to GDPR and CCPA and those areas, to basically use those as the rules in terms of protecting my data and giving me the right to revoke my data and see my data at any time. But there is some of that in here, but it's definitely not the focus of the bill.
Okay. So then we would lean back on the states' rights, right? Because Matt covered that in the beginning. We have, 40-something, 50, privacy laws at the state level. The hope was that we could kind of, flatten these out a little bit and get oversight at the federal level so we don't have to deal with 50 different privacy laws. I guess it doesn't do that then, right? We still have to rely on managing 50 privacy laws along with a federal law at this point, if that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't going to replace CCPA or state laws, right? I think, at least my belief is that the hope is that the California law or some version of it will at some point become, one of these states like California will become the de facto standard across the 50. Because like you said, you can't have 50 states doing different things, right? And so,
you can,
my
Mike,
belief
you can,
is there'll
and
be some
frustratingly, that's
convergence
the way it is.
there. And then this will build on top of that.
Yeah, I hope so too, because it is really problematic right now. That's that is the way we're operating under, and it doesn't make any sense, And then you expand it outside the U.S., like globally, it's even a bigger problem.
Right.
So
exactly right. If you talk to any of these companies that are offering services, and I talk to many of these guys that are offering service across Europe, right? They are struggling with the fact that by and large, people are using GDPR as a default, or using the California law as a default, but not everybody. And there are some tweaks to that, right? So there's definitely a question there with regard to, data privacy separate from the algorithms, right? You want to converge on some type of overall standard there. And then this legislation hopefully builds on top of that.
Yeah. And the reason why I said 40 something and not 50 is because use Rhode Island as a case study. By no means do I think what we have right now written as a law is a comprehensive data privacy law. No way, shape, or form, right? So not all 50 states have anything that I would consider comprehensive, right? Because Rhode Island's law is weak. It really, truly is right now. So, it creates that additional layer now that we have to manage as CISOs and risk officers and privacy officers.
Correct. I think that this brings you back to, right, that bigger point as a CISO, right, which is this is only getting more and more complex. Now I'm going to layer on top of this state-by-state question of how am I handling the data. I'm going to have to layer in now this additional question of how am I handling the algorithms, and are all these algorithms audited, and are they safe, et cetera, right? It's just making the CISO's job much, much more difficult. And so this is where I think the CISOs are going to rely even more than they already do on outside service organizations in order to give them the peace of mind that they're going to require.
So is that the recommendation for the CISOs? Like identify what you have and then quickly go find a third party to manage it for you to get ready? Because again, you add this to the existing CISO plate, it gets a little.
Yeah, how do we prep? How do we prepare?
I think that's
like
absolutely part of the recommendation. I think it's getting an understanding of what you have today. I think it's understanding what is or is not being used there, right? How is that, being used? And then how do I find and how do I start to establish this third-party ecosystem that's gonna protect me and provide these audits, et cetera, because otherwise it's all gonna fall on me. So I think it's a combination of, first of all, identifying what it is I'm using, right? Make sure I understand every piece of AI that's being operated within my company, right? Who owns it? Where's the software from? Am I doing it in-house? Do I have any homegrown stuff that I'm using? What are all those pieces, right?
Is it a hybrid though, right?
How it's being used, and then looking for partners or looking for ways I can audit that.
Yeah, and Mike, that hybrid piece is huge too, because you could be taking, like we said earlier, an existing manufacturer's product, modifying it, creating your own intellectual property internally, and now all of a sudden becomes yours. You own it.
Yeah, this is where this gets very complex, right? As you know, because not only do I have the AI algorithms themselves, but now I have all the data sets. Yeah. And so if I'm using outside data sets, or now am I using internal data sets, and am I using them as is, or am I tweaking them? And then what is that output then? Is that an off-the-shelf output, or is that a customized output? Right. A lot of companies that I know of are doing some level of customization on their own data to get the insights that they want, and liability for that is going to fall on them for compliance.
Yeah, I hear this, and I feel like this is another instance of a FedRAMP-like ecosystem, right? Where we're going to have consultant organizations, third-party providers trying to figure out how to get somebody that's actually certified when there's a very small list of people who are. This is not going to be fun for the CISO community.
Not at all. Not at all. And that's why it's so important that they start to pay attention to this and understand what's going on here, because some form of this is coming. And the sooner you prepare, the sooner you're going to be ready for it. Because as you said, this is a complicated issue.
Yes, it's very complicated. Mike, thank you so much for joining us on Business Security Weekly.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, guys. I enjoyed it.
We're going to take a quick break and then cover the leadership and communications articles for this week.